That was me. Just kidding. Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica. I'm with Literary Arts. Thank you all for being here today for Read Books and Fight the Patriarchy. And thank you, Rachel from Ooligan Press, for partnering with us, and for all the panelists for agreeing to be here today. I know it's really nice out, but we like to be indoors. It's going to be great. Before we get started, I want to open up the space with the land acknowledgement. Literary Arts is based in Portland, Oregon, and we are currently on unceded land. The Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Tumwater, Wallala Bands, and the Tualatin Kalapuya, and many other indigenous nations of the Columbia River occupied and operated on this land long before Western colonizers arrived, and many continue to do so today. Despite attempts of removal and erasure, these communities remain a strong and vital part of our future. Literary Arts recognizes that this acknowledgement is only a small step in affirming the ongoing presence and contributions of our Native communities, and we commit to engaging these communities more fully as we fulfill our mission. For those of you who are not familiar with Literary Arts, we are a nonprofit community-based arts organization with a 35-year history of serving readers and writers. Our mission is to engage readers, support writers, and inspire the next generation with great literature. Our programs include the Portland Arts and Lectures, programs for youth, the Oregon Book Awards and Fellowship Program, and the Portland Book Festival, which, by the way, is coming up. If you're interested, our lineup is live over at literary-arts.org. We also offer reader seminars, writing classes, and free events like this one year-round. Alrighty, I'm going to hand it over to our moderator for today, who is Dr. Rachel Noorda. She is the Director of Publishing and the Assistant Professor at Portland State University. Hi, Rachel.
Thanks, Jessica. So good to see you and to see everybody here. I see a lot of faces and names that I know. Great to see some of the students that I've taught or are part of the program, or some of the alumni and faculty that have been a part of the book publishing program at PSU. Thank you so much for being here. We're so excited for this. Grace, Mary, and Alex will be talking today about great research that they produced while for their final research papers, while part of their culminating experience at PSU and as part of the graduate program in book publishing. And all three of their research projects focus on publishing and patriarchy, and how gender intersects with publishing. And so I think we're going to have a great conversation here today about some of those themes. So I'm going to introduce them all three right now, and the way that this is going to be organized is they're each going to take a couple of minutes to talk about their research projects, give you a little summary, and then we're going to have some Q&A, and I've got some questions lined up too, so we can talk about all three together and some larger themes. So I'm going to start with Grace. Grace Hansen, pronouns she, her, is a marketing professional in Portland, Oregon. She's originally from Northern California, more specifically a little town called Oroville. It was there that she discovered her love of stories, and since grade school, she has been devouring literature with a hunger that only a small town girl dreaming of a bigger world waiting for could. At 17, she left home and set off for Land of Sunsets, Magic Mouses, and Glittering Adventure, Orange County, and earned a bachelor's in literature with an emphasis in business administration. After working and living in Orange County for another couple of years, she sought a change of pace and came to live in Portland. We're so glad she did, to pursue a Master's of Arts in Book Publishing from Portland State University. After graduating in June 2021, she's been working as a marketing coordinator intern at Kittleson and Associates, Inc., helping to bring modern transportation solutions to communities in Oregon. When she's not working, she enjoys outdoor activities like hiking, paddleboarding, camping, and taking walks with her dog, Hash Brown. I miss Hash Brown, especially appearing on our Zoom calls. All right, thanks for being here, Grace.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you all for being here. This is exciting. I'm a little nervous, but I prepared a presentation just because my research focused around the pandemic and publishing, and there's a lot of stats and figures that I can't remember. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Uh-oh, hold on. There it is. Okay. And now I got to get all the stuff out of my way. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Okay. Present. Okay. So my paper was titled "The Patriarchy in Publishing: Examining Effects of the COVID-19 Pandemic on Women, which non-men in the industry, in the publishing industry." My research question was, how has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted women and non-men in the publishing industry? And what does this impact mean for wage gap, sexism in the workplace, and patriarchal institutions in publishing? Part of my research was I sent out a survey to publishing industry professionals. I did interviews with 3 women in publishing in higher management. And then I had a lot of supplemental research that went along with my firsthand data gathering. So without further ado, the 3 main categories that were impacted by this pandemic for women and non-men in the industry would be work-life balance, career path, and wage gap. Those are the themes that came up in all of my interviews and in a lot of the data that I collected. So we'll just go through a couple of the things I found. So with work-life balance, there was a lot of numbers, but basically I want to highlight that among all workers, only 34.9% of parents in households with children can telework. So there's a big thing, the distinction between caretakers and non-caretakers in the pandemic, workflow and time spent at work. It's different when you have children that also are at home and need taken care of. And that a lot of that work falls on women. So women and non-men, which the other quote you can see on the right side, women perform an average of 4 hours of unpaid work per day compared to men's 2.5 hours. This is called shadow work, or it is called shadow work in a lot of scholarly terms. So the value of shadow work is about 10.9 trillion, according to an analysis by Oxfam, and which is larger than the revenue for the 50 largest companies on last year's Global 500 list. So the economic value that women perform extra outside of work has always been larger. And in this pandemic, it was exacerbated with everybody shifting online and households. Every situation is different, but overall, from my interview, these are some quotes that I just wanted to highlight. Working from home and managing so many people, it feels like there's no difference between when I'm on and working and when I'm not working. Parents, people who have family, or people who are caregivers in some way, whether it be children or older people in their home, those are the people, in my experience, from chatting with them, who have struggled the most with work-life balance. One of the interviewees that I talked to, her mom was living with her before the pandemic. And so there were 3 adults to 1 child in her household. And so her quote was, "It would be much harder if my mom wasn't here. It would be a battle between me and my husband about whose work matters most at any given time." And that's a hard battle to have with your person, with your partner. So again, highlighting that shadow work, whose work is most important, and how can we split it evenly. There's no easy answer for anyone, and it's been exasperated by everybody being at home. And then another person said, "I'm really valuing human connections because of this disconnectedness or loneliness that we've all felt at different times this year. And I'm trying to be really intentional about ways to stay connected with," she was talking about coworkers and people in her life, and just being aware that it's requiring more time and effort than it ever used to. So career work-life balance, I don't have a lot of time, but I just wanted to summarize that's people are having a hard time finding a balance, whether you have children and you need more time to work, or you need more time to take care of them, or whether you don't have children and it's just hard to figure out, when should I take my lunch? It's been difficult. So moving on to the next thing, career growth. According to the New York Times and the Bureau of Labor Statistics, women accounted for 55% of the 20.5 million jobs lost in April of last year. And for overall adult women, it was about 15%, but I'm sure for women of color and other disabilities and all of that, they had a much higher rate of unemployment. And then you'll see the graph, December of last year. So a year ago, unemployment for white men was at 5.8. For women overall was at 6.3. Black women, 8.4. Latinas, 9.1. I don't know why they put in women ages 20 to 24, but they had a really high, younger women had a very high unemployment rates, as well as women with disabilities, which has the highest rate. And that was, I think it was a WLA study done, the impacts of COVID-19 on women. It was women in all career fields. So they studied all of them. Though 80% of employees so specifically with publishing, the PW 2019 salary report identified 80% of respondents as women, but only 50% of respondents who identified as women were also in management roles. So that was interesting to me. That says women. The explanation from PW was that they have shorter career. Compared to men's lengthier careers, women haven't been in publishing as long. I don't know if that's accurate, but that was their explanation for why there's a big pay gap. Professionals say it's difficult to navigate career advancement, particularly when seeking promotions, because of a lack of transparency and salary structure and how pay determinations are made within publishing. It's very, editors don't always know what each other makes. And then another report I was reading, there's sufficient statistical data to show that women's careers tend to stall at the midpoint stage, but we don't have enough data to interpret the statistics and point the way forward. I thought that this was a really succinct way of summing up why women's career growth has been impacted, or how it's been impacted by COVID-19. Angela Garbs shares in her essay for the New York Magazine, "I'm a woman of color, a writer, a mother. I struggle with the very gendered fact that I am dependent on my husband's salary, and I worry that it may take me a lifetime to undo the false notion that my work is somehow less valuable." So women have that, it's called depressed entitlement, which means they tend to value their work less than their peers or their male counterparts. And so we actively have to fight against that notion. And COVID-19 has made it really hard. So from my interview quotes, one of my interviewees said, "I am managing a child's experience during this, but I'm also a manager of a relatively young marketing team. And I am in some ways managing their experience during this and trying to help manage their emotions and their time management issues and their concerns about their career during this. I feel like in that situation, what's being lost is my focus on myself." And she continues, "I'm just spread so thin managing other people's needs during this that I feel like during this year, my focus on my own growth or my own professional opportunities or my own interests or what I want to do next, that's really been sublimated." And that was a theme that a lot of women echoed in my research and in my data, that they've been kind of, to keep the train moving or to, to just kind of triage the situation, they've had to drop their own personal aspirations. I identified my interviewees as professional A, B, and C. So professional A relates that she misses the division of work and home, and that time to really devote to professional development and planning and strategizing and looking ahead to a career rather than feeling like I'm treading water. Feels like it's just been trying to stay afloat this year. So there's no mental space or time to devote to planning those next stages. There's no time to do work of self-promotion, which a lot of freelancers need to do. There's a lot of contributing factors that go into that. I would say mental health isn't also an issue that I didn't really get to dive into much into my research, but I think that definitely has a lot to do with how career development has been stunted. And then just the longer this goes on, and this is true for employees at every level, the longer it goes on, it's going to be hard to substantiate what you lost in terms of career growth, but we're all going to have lost something. It feels like we're all stagnant in this pandemic. So finally, with the wage gap, just a quick stat, year-round wages earned, a full-time year-round earned 10,000, almost 10,000 less than her male counterpart on average in 2018. If this wage gap were to remain unchanged, she would earn about 400,000 less than a man over the course of a 40-year career. Black women obviously have it a lot worse. It's crazy. They get 63 cents for every dollar paid to their white non-Hispanic male counterparts. For Latinas, this figure is only 55 cents. And a lot of my research with this for Native and Pacific Hawaiian Islanders and Native American women and women with disabilities, all of those lower stats have to do with the disproportionate amount of women of color in industries that saw significant job losses this past year. Health industry, the care industry, they've been disproportionately affected. Another stat, 64% of mothers were the primary or co-salary earners for their families in 2017, and they lacked an access to supportive work-family policies that enabled them to participate fully in the labor force. So if that was in 2017, what's it like in 2020? I'm very interested. There was no current data on that, but and then to hone in on publishers, basically women saw a median increase of 16,000 in the 2-year gap between the 2019 and 2017 report, and their male counterparts saw an increase of 21,000 per year. So, interview quotes from my interviewees. Mostly they were talking about the lack of transparency and communication in the industry. Here's an interesting quote I thought: people who are outside of the publishing world have the impression that it's fun, because it is. You're doing it because you love it. It's a passion industry, but that makes it very difficult for employers to not take advantage of employees' passion. And then the world sees publishing as a glamour job, and in some ways it is, but it might encourage people to discount the labor involved in creating books and to undervalue it. So another part of the gender wage gap puzzle is that women tend not to negotiate. And so that is something that me and the interviewees were talking about, teaching young girls what kind of skills to negotiate and to get what they deserve. Start teaching them from a young age so that women in their careers know that it's okay to ask for what they deserve. And then there's this tendency for women to pull back naturally. And that's what we were talking about in the last quote. Even if families agree on splitting things up fairly, even if you're in a feminist household where everything is, everybody tries to do everything equally, society is still out there, and it still assumes women are more nurturing, and mothers are the go-to person for children. And so this interviewee was saying she thinks women, even if they don't want to acknowledge it, they carry it with them. And even if their husband or their partner isn't asking them to pull back on work, they may naturally be doing it. So my closing thoughts, some good things that came out of the pandemic. My interviewees were talking about that it may have potentially decentralized publishing away from the New York centric, East Coast centric way we've been doing things. And I don't know, it's almost the end of, no, it's not almost the end. We still have a couple months left of 2021, but are they starting to get back to normal? Since I've written this paper, I've got a new job, and I've started working remotely and hybrid. And so it's interesting to see what kind of stepping into a different work environment is. And then other aspects of the pandemic that I didn't get to explore in this paper that affect publishing professionals, especially women and non-men. Well, yeah, so I will stop sharing. I know that was a lot, and I just kind of threw it at you. So thank you for sticking with me through that. And I would love to pass it on. I don't know if we're just going in a line and if we're doing question and answer right after, or.
Yeah, I'm thinking let's do a question and after, so we make sure everybody
has time to chat.
First. Yes, thank you so much, Grace. One thing that stood out for me when you were talking was this visibility piece, right? I remember the 2019 business book of the year was that Invisible Women. Maybe
Yeah,
I've read that book. And I think visibility, invisible labor, maybe invisible stereotypes and tropes, or how the patriarchy is sometimes invisible within these spaces, is something that actually kind of threads through all three of yours. So it'll be interesting to continue to talk about. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
Introduce Mary now. So I'm going to read your bio, Mary. Mary Williams has had a book in her hand since she could read, and growing up, she loved reading adventure stories, young adult novels, and literary fiction. After earning her bachelor's at Oregon State, go Beavers, in English with a minor in writing, she chose to work toward her master's in book publishing at PSU. For 2 years, she worked at Ooligan Press as the editorial assistant and publisher's assistant. And if you ever need to find her, she is probably trying a new pizza parlor or picking up another plant at the nursery. And she's currently at Timber Press now. Take it away, Mary.
Yeah, this is kind of interesting because the spotlight got put on me, so now I'm just like watching me talk. How do I change? It doesn't matter. Anyway, so hi, I'm Mary. That was my bio. I went to Oregon State, and then I studied book publishing at PSU with these two other lovely ladies who are actually in the same apartment as me right now, so we can all kind of hear each other. And Grace's dog Hash Brown, which you all heard about, came and visited me in the middle of Grace's presentation. I don't know if you got a chance to see, but so I thought that was, anyways, it doesn't matter. Hi, so I just want to give trigger warnings first before I get into discussing this. My paper is on the Me Too movement and how it has impacted the romance genre. So I will be discussing topics like rape culture, consent, and the Me Too hashtag. If any of those things are just something you're not able to hear right now, that's okay. It's a big topic, and it can be a very triggering topic for a lot of people. So my research was basically, how did the Me Too movement, which started, hi Viva, Sorry, my cat is insisting on being a part of this conversation. She's a real feminist too. So mine was on how the Me Too movement, which was started in 2006 by Tarana Burke, who is this amazing woman who recently came out with a book with Brene Brown. It's incredible. I would highly recommend everybody read it. She started this movement in 2006 after having multiple young girls come to her and explain their experience of dealing with sexual abuse as young women. Around that exact same time, there was another thing that was formed. It was called Smart Bitches Trashy Books, and it is a review site for romance readers who enjoy specific tropes or want to know if like they could be impacted by some like heavier topics in a book, such as rape culture, or abuse, because that was very common in the romance genre, especially up until the early 2000s. So with that, I decided to use Smart Bitches Trashy Books as a base for understanding how did the Me Too movement impact the romance genre. The way that I did this was I went through about 400-ish articles, and I looked up how many times the terms rape culture, consent, and hashtag Me Too. Hashtag Me Too was formed in 2017, or it wasn't formed, but it went viral in 2017. Which I think most people can really remember the Harvey Weinstein scandal. That is really where it became viral. So I looked at those three terms within Smart Bitches Trashy Books, plus I interviewed one of the co-founders, and we really discussed how has the romance genre changed. So I have some numbers here, but I didn't make a presentation, so you're just gonna have to stick with me. So basically, the terms were used 384 times over 2015 and 2019. Hashtag Me Too didn't come into use until 2017 due to the Harvey Weinstein scandal and the hashtag Me Too movement. I did build a very big spreadsheet, as Kathy is saying in the thing, and I was able to really see just how big of a difference there is. So if you get a chance to look at my thesis, there's actually a graph in there, and you can see everything slowly escalating, and then just a major peak at 2017 where the discussion of rape culture, consent, and Me Too became really big. In order to really understand just how major of a event this was, we need to kind of talk about the history of the romance genre. The romance genre has been around for centuries, thousands of years. It's something that everybody knows about, everybody's written about, even back in ancient Greece. And it became an actually recognized genre in the late 1700s with a book that was about a woman who fell for a man that had actually sexually assaulted her. This was written by a man, and it was written for women to be able to recognize romance. So we have to talk about how the original definition of romance came from an abusive situation. And from that, it continued to grow over the years and become a multi-billion-dollar genre industry. Everybody's seen the covers that have so many weird hairs going everywhere, all over the cover. Like, what's his name? Fabio is always on it somehow, because that is just like peak masculinity, I guess. And it was really fascinating because honestly, we didn't start seeing a change from this style, which was a woman gets assaulted, she gets kidnapped, she gets attacked in some way by the hero. That's the male interest. And then and then somehow he realizes his mistake and she's able to forgive him, and then they're happily ever after. And that was the way that we were explained romances, which is extremely toxic and unfair for women. And it perpetuated this idea that allowed us to continue it in our day-to-day lives. It also allowed us to romanticize these acts, which they shouldn't be romanticized because they're extremely traumatizing. So we didn't start seeing a kind of shift in that until the mid 1990s. And even then, there wasn't discussions of consent. We started seeing, especially around 2015, 2017, which is when the hashtag Me Too went viral, we started to see we started to see the actual conversation of consent in romance novels. That's actually why my thesis or final paper, if you get a chance to look at it, is called Consent is Sexy. That's something that the co-founder of Smart Bitches Trashy Books really wanted to emphasize for the people who are reading these books, especially people in heteronormative relationships or heterosexual relationships, because romance genre is a very heteronormative industry. Sorry, words. There's a lot of things. She really wanted to emphasize that consent can be sexy and it can be valued and it can be desired, because that is something that needs to be talked about. So that's when we start to see the really major difference in 2017. Now, as we continue, we are starting to see that change in LGBTQ plus romance literature. We're starting to see more talks about consent amongst those, and like, what does it mean to have two men or two women or a trans individual in a relationship and not be going by heteronormative stereotypes, which is, there's a man and a woman. So which one's more feminine, which one's more masculine? It started becoming these discussions of like, how do we keep that? And then also have consent in the book. So that was pretty much my paper. It was super fascinating. I really loved it. I think there was a link added in the chat. So that's all I got. Would love to pass this on to Alex now, where she talks about more women.
Thanks, Mary. I'm really excited to talk about romance some more in the Q&A after. It's so interesting, and you did some great work on consent and Me Too and romance. So yay, thank you very much. Okay, Alex, I'm going to introduce you now, and so excited to hear about your research too. So Alex Gonzales, she, her pronouns, grew up in the New Mexico desert, surrounded by the endless blue skies and the smell of green chili. She received her bachelor's in 2019 at the University of New Mexico for journalism and mass communications and psychology. And that year, she followed her passion for reading and writing to rain-soaked Portland, where she earned her master's degree in book publishing. She's now the publicity assistant for Tin House, where she gets to help authors get the recognition that they deserve for their books. And when she's not working, you can find her with her nose in a book or sketching in her journal. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, Rachel. Hi, everyone. Today I'm going to talk to you about my research paper, which is titled Woman Turned Warrior, an analysis on the strong female character trope and the influence it has on gender stereotypes through the use of back cover copy. It's a mouthful. I want to mention my research question first so that we can kind of get an overall summary of what it's going to be about and what I'm going to be talking about. And my research question was, how do publishers use back cover copy descriptions to market the strong female character trope in YA fantasy and science fiction? And how does this reinforce gender stereotypes? So to do this, I used content analysis for my research, and this consisted of word frequency, gendered word analysis, and thematic coding. The gendered word analysis provides qualitative evidence for the presence of gendered language in the back cover descriptions, and then the word frequency and thematic coding provide additional context to the language that was used. So I also want to mention a little bit about my lit review, because there are some big themes that are happening in all of this, and you kind of need more context behind it. So marketing is obviously one of the most important aspects of book sales. And when marketing, the language used in back cover copy can make or break sales. Back cover copy is also one of the first things that consumers look at when deciding whether or not to purchase a book. A quote from my research, Bass Turkman found that unless readers can see the connection between the content of their work and their values, and unless they can identify with the description or the language used, they're unlikely to select the work, even if it's brilliant, even if there's a ton of praise behind it. They have to be able to identify with that description. So this just really puts an importance on the language that is used on that back cover copy. The next thing I want to go over, what is a strong female character? So this tends to be any female character, main female character, who has to overcome her feminine ways so that she can be brought up to the man's level and finally become a hero. I just want to point out that there is no such thing as a strong male character. It is just assumed that men are inherently strong. So this is just interesting because when female characters are described as strong, we often associate her to traits that are more masculine, such as strength, power, aggression, warrior. So while portraying strong female characters is not a bad thing, it's problematic because focusing on creating strong women, it's only one definition of what a strong woman can be, or a woman in general. So it's perfectly fine for women to appreciate themselves in a physical sense and as a warrior and see themselves like that in fiction. But the bigger problem is that readers begin to view this as a type of character as the standard, and she should not be the only type of woman out there saving the world. So in my data, I collected 60 book titles that were from NPD BookScan, and they were all bestseller data, and they followed certain criteria. So they were from the years 2010 to 2021, and they were the top 5 YA fantasy and sci-fi books from each year. And to determine YA, I used young adults aged 12 to 18. So it had to be labeled like that in NPD BookScan. It had to be labeled as YA, science fiction, fantasy, or magic. And for years previous to 2017, since young adult wasn't a thing before that, I used juvenile fiction from 2010 to 2016. So I ended up with 60 books in my sample, and I used the back cover copy from Goodreads. So we'll start with gendered word analysis, which is how to quantify the gendered language in the book cover description. And so I ran 2 word lists, one that used masculine gendered words and one with feminine gendered words, which I got from a research paper, Emma Hobley's research paper called Gendered Language in Book Copy, and she created it based off of language, and she looked up a lot of different things. So her word list really helped me. And I assigned each a value. So -1 for feminine words and +1 for masculine words. So that way it would balance out. I expected the book descriptions to have more masculine gendered language because of the strong female character trope often seen in YA fantasy. And the strong female character trope usually requires the main female character to take on more masculine traits and reject feminine traits. So most of the book descriptions contained masculine coded language, as I thought, even when the main character was female. So both male and female main characters tended to have more masculine coded language. And this was consistent with my observation. And it was interesting because she had to choose one or the other. She couldn't choose both, being feminine and masculine. She had to choose one or the other, otherwise she couldn't be the hero. So the next thing I want to talk about is thematic coding, which is the next aspect that I did. Thematic coding allows the research to kind of dive deeper into the context behind the language used, because we can't just look at specific words. As I looked through each book description and started the thematic coding, I noticed there were a lot of similar themes, specifically with books that had female main characters. Often the back cover copy would describe how the women and her society or her town were under the control or serving some institution, and usually the government, and they had to become some type of warrior to be able to save the world. So an example of this is from the Book of Dust, where the back cover copy talks about how the main character, Nina, wants to become a healer because she has never been violent. However, later on in the back cover description, she has to change her lifestyle and become a warrior and more fierce in order to save the world and the person she loves, because she's been chosen. So the nuance here is that the woman has to become more masculine or take on those more masculine traits in order to defeat the big villain. And why couldn't Nina rely on her strengths as a healer, which tends to be more feminine, to save the person she loves? Why does she have to become something that she's not? So this plot line never happened with male main characters. Male main characters were often already prepared to defeat the villain and did not have to go through this transformation that the women did. So this shows that women are often expected to take the traits men have to typically have to win. The last thing I used was word frequency. I used Voyant, which is a web-based reading and analysis environment software for digital text, a big word, but it basically just analyzes a bunch of words and finds the word frequency of all of them. It was interesting to look at because it just provides a little bit more context about the characters and the words being used. This one was different though. I took the top 45 most frequent words, and the gender bias leaned towards feminine, which was interesting. It was the only one out of both thematic coding and gendered word analysis that was more feminine. So just take that into consideration when thinking about this. So I've been talking about how the masculine gendered language was very pervasive in all of the back cover copy, regardless of the gender of the main character who is being marketed to. The persistent positive associations with masculine gendered language imply how women in books often have to give up those feminine qualities, which I've already said. And the gendered language just reinforces these negative stereotypes of what men and women have to be in order to succeed. So feminine gendered language is often seen as inferior or something that needs to be thrown away for the more masculine traits. So in conclusion, this research shows that there's a bias towards portraying women characters with more masculine gender language. However, about 25 years ago, this was the opposite. So according to Sanders in 1996, it was important to emphasize more masculine-centered values like courage and honor in fantasy fiction, especially for female characters. So back in 1996, this was a huge change in how women were being written because there needed to be more representation of strong female characters. So now that society is changing again, 25 years later, there is another shift that should happen, I think, and that is embracing more traditional feminine qualities as heroic. So, and I'm not saying that there shouldn't be women characters that are warriors. There should be, but there should also be women depicted as heroes through the use of their traditionally feminine qualities. And these qualities shouldn't be demonized or portrayed as weak and unhero-like. And all humans are complex and complicated, women included, and they should be represented as such in fiction. So that's just a little bit about what I did.
Amen. That was a great last sentence. Thank you.
Thank you.
So great. Perfect. Oh, three great presentations and wonderful papers. I've put the links to the three of them so that all of you here in this meeting can go and read them if you haven't already. But for now, we're going to turn the time over to questions for audience. I've got questions for the panelists too, if we want to dive into those. But you're welcome to either type your question in chat or pop on mic if you'd like to ask a question. Looks like we've got a question for Grace from Rosina. How did you choose who you interviewed, Grace?
So being in the program, I had access to a couple of different avenues of kind of finding out who to talk to. So one of them actually was one of my professors. Another one was a mentor. And then another one was a advisor on the advisory board for Ooligan. And I would have done probably more if I had time, but yeah, so it was mostly the connections that I had made in the program and in the Pacific Northwest.
I thought your point, Grace, was really interesting when you were talking about how individuals tend to undervalue the publishing industry, especially like, I feel like a major part of that has to do with, it is a very women-run industry, but also there's a lot of things that people learn in like, you know, in English classes in high school. And it's just like, oh yeah, I know what a plot is. And you're just like, well, yeah, but do you know the nuances of a plot? And I thought that was a really interesting point. And it's something that we continue to see portrayed, I don't know, in the industry, even as I talk to people who have been experienced for 40 plus years, they still have people mansplaining to them about, you know, like, well, this is what developmental editing is, you know?
Yeah. I've just lost the train of my thought, but thank you everyone who came. You said Mary just said well done, so thank you so much.
I've got a question for the three of you. So, especially thinking about your particular topics and how this applies to this question, what does a feminist book publishing space look like to you? You know, maybe a future one, maybe we're not, I don't think we're quite there yet, but what are your thoughts on this?
I think the most important thing to becoming a more feminist book publishing space is intersectionality, especially within manager positions. There's definitely not enough of Black and brown women in manager positions at publishing places. And I just think that would help a lot with feminism in general in the industry. And as editors and as like just overall, there needs to be more diversity. And I'm sure everybody agrees. It's just about getting that work done and actually hiring those women. So.
And I think along with that, like getting those women hired, getting those people hired, whether they identify as women or non-binary or, you know, along with that, the career growth aspect of it, I think needs to be expanded on. I think there needs to be more transparency in the industry with wages and salaries and how promotions work. And I think there needs to be a really honest talks throughout the industry. And it's one of those things that one of the interviewees I had in my paper was saying that as with a lot of things in publishing, it's going to be slow and it's going to not all come at once. It's going to come in bits and pieces. And we've already seen bits and pieces. We've seen individual publishing companies step up and be that example of that feminist space. And, you know, our other roommate, Emma, works at a kid's book about, and so that's when I feel like that's a good example of a better space that we can kind of imagine in the future. But yeah, go along with that.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the major things that feminism is trying to change is toxic masculinity being at the forefront of a lot of the ways that our society works. So, and for me, one of the key aspects of toxic masculinity is having power over others. That's something that was actually like something I found a lot in romance. Was it would romanticize the idea of a man having power over a woman or being able to be like this being that taught them something. And so for that, for me, toxic masculinity, another part of it is keeping down diversity and making it harder for us to create more diverse environments within our own offices, within our own lives. So for me, when I think of like a truly feminism publishing space, I think of an extremely diverse publishing space that involves a lot of equality and a lot of equity. And that requires us to not just be like, oh, we need more women, you know, but it's like, no, we need more LGBTQ plus. We need more people who like aren't being shamed for having disabilities, like, because without all these things, then we're going to continue to just portray it. I mean, honestly, like, I think I was looking at a study and it was like 76% of the publishing industry is women, and it's very feminist. But the thing is it's also mostly white women. And that's a very singular narrative, I would say. While we all have our own stories, it doesn't allow us to really truly understand what a good chunk of our country in the US is really going through, or what their story is, or what the impacts like of their ethnicity may have had on their lives. So we need to have I don't know. I think a truly feminist publishing place is somewhere where we are putting diversity at the forefront, and not just diversity in our interns, but like what Ali was saying, diversity in managing positions, creating DEI groups, making sure that their voices are being heard more than just, you know, the probably like 76% of white women that are here.
Thank you all. It's great. Okay, I think we maybe have time for one more question. And I'm seeing something in the chat. Okay, Kathy says, a disturbing trend in nonfiction front list is the rise of conservative talk show hosts being bestsellers. We've seen staff of those publishers resisting the book deals. Do the three of you have recommendations for how to deal with market pressure versus a feminist DEI affirming press?
I have to read this again. Sorry, one moment.
I think there was also a question for
Oh,
Alex.
there's one
about
earlier
that.
too. Yep. This is for Alex.
Yeah. Yeah, I can answer. I've read it. I can answer that real quick while we're rereading Kathy's question as well. Yes, you're absolutely correct. These traits are probably seen as more masculine because of the patriarchy. But I think because feminine traits are not seen as much, so they need to be seen more is basically what I'm saying. Like there need to be heroes with those other traits that aren't traditionally masculine. And I totally agree that they're probably seen as aggression and warrior-like traits are seen as masculine because of that patriarchy that we're under. But I do think that I was looking at it based off of traditionally masculine and traditionally feminine. And since traditionally feminine isn't seen as hero-like, that's what I was kind of getting at. But that's definitely a good point to make. Helena, I think I'm saying your name right. Good point.
For Kathy's question, I'm thinking, I guess my initial thoughts on staff who are resisting book deals that they don't agree with goes back to Mary and Alex's point about having feminist DEI inclusive leadership and you know, a lot of this industry is an industry, it's a business. And so a lot of leaders are going to see that, you know, radical views are bestsellers, and you know, no matter what side the radical view is on, like it's going to like cause some stir, and it's going to, you know, get people talking about it, and people want to buy and get involved with that. And so I think if there's an opportunity for money to be made in a market that supports making money, it's going to happen. But the I guess recommendation would be to continue to work towards a more diversely led industry, so that, you know, people are always going to be able to publish their ideas, whether it's self-publishing or a big 5, you know, publishing house. It's who accept, you know, they're the gatekeepers, but you know, everything's going to funnel into the public at some point. I'm kind of, Mary, do you?
I was gonna say, I think something that's really important is like, because we do exactly what you're saying, Grace, we see a lot of very radical point of views. I think a way to combat radical point of views without like dismissing certain voices that may have like more conservative views, like in any way, is to recognize, you know, when do we hit a point where it's toxicity and we're just promoting like, you know, like promoting certain ideals that can cause harm to other people.
Profiting off of fear mongering or profiting off
yes,
of
exactly.
kind of
and I think that's the thing, is I think that there can absolutely be, you know, like more conservative talk show hosts who are publishing books, and I think that there's an audience for it, and there's a very healthy way to talk about conservative point of views without leading to an extremely radical white supremacist based ideal. You know, it's being able to look at the liberal side and the conservative side, and being able to say, okay, but like, we don't want to say like, these people suck, like, and they all need to just be like left away from the world. But how about we find a writer who's saying, hey, from my like vaguely moderate standpoint, as a more conservative leaning person, maybe this could be a way to go. Rather than just picking someone for the name and the like, next loudest thing that they can say. Yeah, that's kind of my point of view on it, I would say, is finding a way to do it without causing possible violence towards other individuals.
We're pretty much out of time, but Alex, did you want to say anything on Kathy's question, or are you good?
I think they've pretty much said
Okay,
everything I was
that's
gonna
fine.
say. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you three so much, and thanks to Literary Arts. You three and Jessica you're all women that I really admire and who have influenced my life and really touched me. And I think part of this whole discussion and talking about patriarchy and feminism is for women to support women as well. So I'd love to see more of that too. Thank you all in the audience for being here. Thank you, Jessica, for helping set this up. I appreciate all of you.
Thank you guys.
Thank you, Jessica.
Great weekend.
Thank you. Hi, Mom.
Your mom here, Mary?
Yeah, that's right. You see the Dan Williams